the moment he stepped into the lounge. Everything about him became a target. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy. He didn't even make eye contact with anyone. And yet, the hush that fell over the room when he walked in was unmistakable. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask questions, it already had answers. Answers formed from the tilt of his eyes, the gold undertone of his skin, the way his name, Daniel Kwan, blinked across the check-in kiosk screen in quiet authority. The first-class lounge at JFK wasn't exactly famous for being welcoming to the unexpected. Polished, expansive, with leather chairs that sunk deep and too many glass walls, it wasn't designed to hold surprises. And Daniel, in their eyes, was a surprise. He didn't wear a designer suit, no flashy Rolex, no briefcase with a custom tag. Just a muted navy jacket, simple sneakers, and that ever so slightly creased boarding pass he pulled from his pocket like it was nothing. He was 35, calm, clean-cut, the kind of man you might not look at twice in a grocery store, but the kind of man who, in the wrong room, made people tense. The receptionist, a blonde woman in her early 40s with a diamond-studded name tag that read Marla, barely masked her pause when she looked up at him. Her voice was polite, yes, but only by script. "Sir, I believe this lounge is reserved for our first-class passengers or Diamond Elite members only." Daniel gave a soft, non-threatening smile. "I know. I'm in 1A on Flight 972 to San Francisco." He offered the boarding pass. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it, then up at him, then back at the pass. A flicker of doubt danced behind her eyes. "Do you have a company ID or a confirmation number?" she asked a little louder now. Just enough for the man sipping scotch behind Daniel to glance over his glass. "I believe the boarding pass should suffice," Daniel said. Still calm. Still no edge in his tone. It should have ended there, but it didn't. From behind the desk, a taller man emerged mid-50s, thinning hair, the kind of face that screamed board meetings and power lunches. He didn't introduce himself. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, eyeing Daniel like he was casing the place. "Apparently, me," Daniel answered simply, gesturing to the still unaccepted boarding pass. "Can I see that?" the man said, now stepping between Daniel and the desk, subtly asserting dominance. Daniel handed it over. There it was. Row 1A, Flight 972, JFK to SFO, first class, all legitimate. Still, the man scanned it like it was counterfeit. "What's your purpose for traveling, sir?" he asked. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware I needed one." The man smirked, that condescending, corner smile smirk that thinks it's hidden but never is. "It's not common for freelancers to be in 1A, he said casually, though the implication was anything but. "Freelancer," Daniel repeated, his voice neutral, his stance relaxed, but something subtle shifted in his eyes. The man handed the pass back. "Just routine," he said. "Please wait over there while we verify." Verify what Daniel asked. "Just routine," the man repeated. It wasn't routine. Daniel knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. And then someone spoke. "He was in line before me," came a voice, clear, female, sharp with tension. A woman in a red pantsuit, clutching her Birkin bag. "You didn't ask me to verify anything." The staff ignored her. They pretended like she hadn't spoken. Daniel simply nodded at her in acknowledgement, then stepped to the side as instructed. He didn't argue. He didn't cause a scene. But as he sat quietly near the oversized window, he noticed a phone being picked up behind the desk, a call being made. He could feel it happening. The quiet assumption, the suspicion that he didn't belong. The words weren't said, but they hung heavy in the air. He didn't look like someone who should sit in 1A. He didn't feel like someone who could own a seat in first class. So they stalled him. 10 minutes. 20. No drink offered, no updates, just ignored. Until the atmosphere in the lounge shifted. A man in a black suit walked in, sharp, official, carrying a device in one hand and a quiet urgency in the other. He wasn't TSA, he wasn't airport staff, but whatever badge he flashed, it made Marla stiffen, and the tall man turned pale. Daniel stood, and in that moment, that very moment, everything changed. The man in the black suit spoke directly, clearly, and not to the staff. "Mr. Kwan, apologies for the delay. The board meeting has been moved to Gate 12C as requested. Your team is waiting." Marla blinked. The tall man took a step back. Gate 12C wasn't a boarding gate, it was a private terminal. And team board meeting, something didn't fit. And then loud and clear, across the room, a young woman in a navy vest approached with a tablet and an awkward, panicked smile. "Mr. Daniel Kwan, founder and CEO of Ether Air. We're ready when you are." The silence this time wasn't born from judgment. It was from realization. Ether Air, the fast-growing transcontinental airline making headlines for disrupting the aviation industry, had a founder. And apparently, he was Asian. Apparently, he was standing right in front of them. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply picked up his boarding pass, adjusted his jacket, and walked past the stunned faces. But just before he left, he turned to the receptionist and the tall man behind her. "Next time," he said softly, "don't let your assumptions make you look this small." And then he was gone. But the shame lingered long after. So did the sound of the woman in red letting out a quiet, satisfied laugh. And the rest was only just beginning. Daniel didn't look back, not once, as the glass doors closed behind him, sealing off the shocked expressions inside the lounge. He exhaled, slow and steady. It wasn't the first time he had been doubted, judged, reduced to a stereotype in a tailored world that still couldn't see past the surface. But this time, something was different. This time, they would remember. The corridor leading to the private terminal was quiet. Carpeted silence, frosted walls, soft lighting. The kind of space designed not to draw attention. A place built for the powerful to move like ghosts. Daniel walked with purpose. Not faster, not slower, just steady. The man in the black suit trailed behind him, clearly rattled by the delay. "Sir," he said, voice low, almost apologetic. "They didn't know who you were." It wasn't cleared fast enough on the lounge side. Daniel glanced over. "You mean they didn't bother to ask?" The man faltered. "Yes, sir." Daniel didn't press further. He didn't need to. The look on his face controlled. Cool, unimpressed, said everything. When they reached the private suite, two assistants stood waiting. One handed him a tablet, the other a slim folder. There was a board member from Astronova who landed an hour ago, the assistant whispered. "She's waiting at the tarmac. Wants a word before takeoff." Daniel nodded. He wasn't just flying to San Francisco. He was the reason this flight existed. Ether Air wasn't just a company. It was his company, his blueprint, his vision, his relentless pursuit of change in an industry that had left innovation on the runway 20 years ago. Low-emission aircraft, AI-powered scheduling, passenger-first design. It wasn't just tech, it was transformation. And yet, just 10 minutes ago, he'd been mistaken for a scammer, a fraud, a nobody. He closed the folder. Inside was a document from the Department of Transportation green light for Phase 2, expanding Ether's operations to Europe. Massive news, but the faces in that lounge. They wouldn't have cared if they saw the signature of the president herself on that paper, because people like Daniel weren't supposed to own things. They were supposed to serve them. He stared out the tinted glass toward the tarmac, where his custom Ether Air jet waited, sleek, all white. Subtle silver logo embossed near the cockpit. Inside that plane, 10 department heads waited, engineers, strategists, legal minds, designers, people who'd flown from 4 states for this mid-air session because that's how Daniel worked, never wasting a second, never slowing down, not for doubt, not for judgment, not even for racism. Back inside the lounge, Marla and the tall man, whose name, as it turned out, was Edward Sterling, were still frozen in their places. Edward finally spoke. "Founder," he whispered, almost to himself. "I thought it was a mistake," Marla added weakly. But the murmurs had begun. Passengers were whispering. The woman in red wasn't whispering at all. "Funny how quick you were to stop him, but didn't ask the guy in the Burberry jacket for proof," she said, sipping her now warm coffee. "He didn't even have a boarding pass ready." Edward looked like he'd swallowed glass. He tried to compose himself, walking stiffly behind the counter, muttering security protocol. He didn't match expected profiles. "Expected profiles," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean white, old, and loud?" Edward flushed, but he had no answer, because there wasn't one. The next 45 minutes unfolded in the air. Literally, Daniel's flight took off with flawless precision. And as the wheels left the runway, he opened the in-flight meeting with calm conviction. "Before we start," he said, standing at the front of the minimalist cabin, "I want to remind everyone why we're here. No PowerPoint, no speechwriter, just Daniel. I started Ether Air because I was tired of waiting for permission. Tired of asking gatekeepers who didn't see the future, and who never saw me." The room was still. The only sound was the gentle hum of altitude rise. They said no one would fly with an Asian kid from Pasadena who didn't come from Boeing or Airbus, that passengers wanted trusted brands, that investors wanted predictability. He paused. "Now we own the second most booked coastal route in the country." A ripple of quiet pride moved across the team. "But we're not done. They're still watching us the way Marla did, like we don't belong in the room." He looked up, eyes sharp. "So let's stop asking for the room." The team leaned in, energized, united. "Let's build the damn room ourselves." Back on the ground, the whispers had spread further. Someone in the lounge had tweeted the scene, posting a blurry photo of Daniel standing near the reception desk, with the caption, "They told him to wait." 10 minutes later, they called him CEO of the airline. And then another tweet. They asked Daniel Kwan if he had permission to sit in 1A. Turns out, he's the one who signed the plane into existence. Retweets, shares, comments, it moved fast. By the time Daniel's jet reached cruising altitude, his name was trending, but he wasn't watching Twitter. He was reviewing plans for a new hybrid engine prototype. Because while the world debated whether he looked like a CEO, he was too busy being one. Meanwhile, Edward's phone buzzed. A call from corporate. Marla glanced at him, her face pale. Edward didn't answer it. He already knew what was coming. Because some mistakes don't stay behind the desk. They travel. They follow. They echo, especially when you try to shrink someone who was meant to fly. At 38,000 feet, with the Pacific glow on one side and a future-shaped mission ahead, Daniel Kwan leaned back in his seat not to rest, but to reflect. The cabin lights were dim now. His team had dispersed throughout the aircraft, engaged in whispered strategy sessions, animated sketches on tablets, and virtual projections of flight path optimizations. But Daniel was still replaying that moment where he stood in front of a woman who looked through him like he was a fraud, and a man who believed his authority alone could push him aside. He'd dealt with worse. He'd been called worse. He'd walked into venture capital rooms where his pitch was applauded, but he was still questioned. And yet, somehow, this one stuck. Why? Because it was so casual, so routine. It wasn't rage, it wasn't hate. It was something colder. It was dismissal. It was the belief that someone like him couldn't possibly own something as big, as bold, as ambitious as an airline. That subtle racism, it wasn't just offensive, it was exhausting. Meanwhile, down on the ground, the fire had already spread. The tweet thread had reached over 2 million views in under 3 hours. Influencers reposted it. Journalists caught wind. One post read, "When you kick someone out of your lounge and then find out he signs your paychecks." Daniel Kwan, Shirkasser legend. By early afternoon, Etherhair's public relations inbox was overflowing with inquiries. "Is it true your CEO was profiled at JFK? Can you confirm the name of the lounge staff involved? Will Mr. Kwan be addressing this publicly?" The company didn't rush a statement. They didn't need to, because Daniel never needed a public defense. The facts were the defense. Back on the jet, the mood shifted as the meeting pivoted to expansion. So we're looking at Tokyo, Seattle, Singapore, LAX, and then the wild card, Heathrow. The room went silent at that last one. Heathrow meant legacy. It meant going head-to-head with century-old carriers. Daniel smiled. "That's where we aim next," he said. "And we don't wait to be invited." One of his execs, a Nigerian-born operations strategist named Obina, leaned forward. "You know they'll push back," he said. "Gate slots, licensing, old boy networks." Daniel nodded. "Of course. But they underestimated us in JFK's lounge. And that was today." They all chuckled. Even he couldn't resist. Obina added, "Let's give them a reason to regret that." Daniel paused. "Let's give everyone who doubts people like us a reason to never do it again." That wasn't business, that was justice. Later that evening, as the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Daniel received a discreet message from legal. It was about Edward. Apparently, Edward had made a panicked call to his corporate chain the moment Daniel left the lounge. Tried to justify his actions under security policies and protocols, claimed he had every right to question a guest who didn't present expected identification, but the higher-ups weren't buying it. The footage from the lounge showed it all. There was no aggression, no ambiguity. Just an Asian man politely showing his boarding pass and being humiliated for it. It wasn't policy, it was prejudice, and corporate knew that wasn't a storm they wanted to weather, especially not now, not when the world was watching. As the plane touched down, Daniel checked his notifications. One stood out. A direct message from a woman named Lisa Kim, a young Korean-American lawyer who had followed Etherhair's rise from the start. Her message read, "You don't know me, but I've watched every keynote you've given. I've sat in waiting rooms where I was assumed to be the assistant when I was the lead counsel. What happened at JFK, I've lived that in 100 forms. Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for owning the moment. You didn't just walk through that room, you redefined it." Daniel read it twice, then again. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. But he took a breath, the kind that goes deeper than oxygen. The kind that fills you with fuel. Because that message, that's what made it all worth it. By the time he arrived at Etherhair's Silicon Valley headquarters, a crowd of employees had already gathered in the glass atrium. They applauded not for what he built, but for what he stood for. No one needed to say it, but they felt it. This company wasn't just about technology or aviation. It was about defiance. It was about rising. It was about never apologizing for the space you take up, especially when others try to shrink it. Daniel walked through the crowd like he always did, humbly, quietly, but unshakably, and someone from marketing whispered as he passed, "They thought he didn't belong in 1A. Turns out, he built the entire plane. Back in New York, Edward Sterling was escorted into a private HR meeting. The head of compliance didn't waste words. "This is your third profiling incident in 8 months, she said. "And this time, you targeted the CEO of one of our partner airlines during an approved visit." Edward stammered, reaching for excuses that never sounded right once they left his mouth. "I didn't know." "That's the problem. she snapped. You didn't care to know. The silence that followed was different from the lounge silence. This one hurt, and it would cost him more than his job. It would cost him the comfort of thinking he could ever again weaponize policy against people who didn't look like him. Later that night, Daniel sat alone on the rooftop of his apartment, watching the bay lights twinkle below. He wasn't celebrating, he was thinking about the boy who once sat at the back of math class while classmates whispered jokes about his lunchbox, about the teen who interned at an airline and was mistaken for the delivery guy twice, about the man who now ran a company with jets in 3 continents, but still had to prove he deserved to sit down in a lounge he paid to help design. This wasn't a victory lap, this was a promise, to never let silence win, to speak even when no one asks, and to remind every person watching, you don't have to yell to be powerful. You just have to own the room even when they try to shut the door. 2 days after the incident at JFK, a video surfaced. It wasn't polished. It wasn't from an official news source. It was grainy, handheld, with the awkward angle of a phone camera peeking over a shoulder, but it captured everything. The moment Daniel was asked to wait over there, the smirk on Edward's face, the disbelief in the woman in red's voice, and most importantly, the shift in energy when the words founder and CEO of Ether Air were spoken aloud. The clip was 1 minute 36 seconds long, but it spread like wildfire. It was on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Reels, even LinkedIn, where corporate executives reposted it with captions like, "Diversity isn't about checking boxes. It's about knowing when the smartest person in the room might not look like what you expected." Some called it poetic justice. Others called it a wake-up call. But for Daniel, it was neither. It was just another Tuesday. That afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected call, not from a journalist, not from an investor, but from the president of Zenith Airways, one of the oldest legacy carriers in the country, and once Daniel's first employer. His voice was clipped, cautious. "Daniel," he said, "I wanted to apologize." Daniel said nothing. "I heard what happened at JFK. That shouldn't have happened to anyone, especially not you." Daniel let the silence hang. The man continued. "You know, when you applied to our graduate program, I remember your file, stellar academic record, perfect attendance, but you didn't get through the final round." "I remember," Daniel said quietly. There was a pause. "I voted no." There it was, just like that. "I thought you lacked presence," the man admitted. "Didn't have the right energy to lead pilots or represent the brand." And now Daniel asked, voice even. The man sighed. "Now, you're the brand everyone wants." Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't thank him, because this wasn't closure. It was just confirmation. Confirmation that the people who shut doors on him were now knocking, hoping he'd let them in. And he wouldn't. Not yet. Not like that. That evening, Ether Air issued an official statement. Short, measured, razor sharp. "We remain committed to an air travel experience that is not only innovative, but inclusive. Our founder, Daniel Kwan, believes in leading by example, not outrage, but let it be known no one should have to prove their worth to take a seat they've already earned." The post ended with a quote from Daniel himself. "Next time someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere, remember, you're not here to fit in, you're here to change it." Within hours, the statement was being shared by Fortune 500 CEOs, civil rights advocates, student organizations, and thousands of young professionals who had once been mistaken for interns when they were the only ones running the meeting. The next day, Daniel walked into Ether Air's San Francisco HQ to find the walls of the central hallway transformed. Every employee had been asked to submit a photo of the moment they felt underestimated, a scan of their first rejection letter, a photo of a janitor badge from their first job, a screenshot of an email that addressed them by the wrong name. Daniel stopped at one, a grainy photo of a man South Asian, mid-20s, mopping the floor at LaGuardia. Underneath, a caption, They called me Kid for 2 years. Now I lead Ether's Safety Innovations Division. He smiled. This was the room he wanted to be in. Not the first-class lounge, not the boardroom in Tokyo. This, where stories were not erased, but elevated. But the twist, the part no one expected, it came later that week. The chairman of JFK's private lounge services, the man overseeing hospitality contracts for over 80 terminals, reached out. Through an intermediary, quietly, he wanted to meet. I made a mistake. The message read, I trusted the wrong people with the right responsibilities. I want to discuss a better partnership. Daniel raised an eyebrow when he read it. A better partnership. That's when it clicked. JFK was scared, not of him, but of irrelevance. Because if Ether Air decided to pull their first-class contract from the terminal, it wouldn't just be a headline. It would be a statement, a devastating one. 3 days later, Daniel walked back into JFK. Same jacket, same quiet stride, but this time there was no hesitation at the desk. Marla wasn't there. Edward wasn't there. Instead, a new staffer greeted him with a practiced smile and a tablet already queued up. Mr. Kwan, she said, we've prepared a private room for you. But Daniel paused. He turned and walked past the velvet ropes into the main lounge. Every head turned. Some recognized him. Some weren't sure, but felt something shift. Daniel sat in the middle of the room. No entourage, no noise, just him. Then he pulled out his laptop and opened a document titled, Future of Access Rethinking Who Gets to Belong. That was the real power play, not revenge. Redesign, not punishment. Rebuilding, he wasn't there to be served. He was there to lead. And as the lounge buzzed nervously around him, Daniel Kwan did what no one expected. He took up space. He owned it. And no one dared ask him why. 1 week after the lounge incident, Daniel Kwan stood before 3,000 people in the keynote hall of the Global Aviation Summit in San Diego. CEOs, government regulators, engineers, airline execs, they were all there. His presence on stage wasn't scheduled. It wasn't even announced. He was invited last minute after news of his silent stand at JFK hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The man they tried to remove from first class now writes the rules. The spotlight narrowed. The crowd quieted. Daniel didn't clear his throat. He didn't need to. He began with a pause, a deliberate silence that stretched just long enough to make the powerful shift in their chairs. Then, with complete calm, I was told to wait in a lounge I helped finance. I was doubted by people who didn't even ask my name. And I was expected to be quiet because I looked like I didn't belong. The audience held their breath. I didn't yell, I didn't demand, I didn't threaten lawsuits, because the loudest statement I could make was to sit down, open my laptop, and remind them I own the plane. Applause erupted. Not polite clapping, real applause. People stood up. Some whistled. But Daniel raised a hand. He wasn't done. I didn't share that story for sympathy. I shared it because it's not just my story. It's yours. It's every woman passed over for leadership. Every black pilot who was told passengers wouldn't feel safe. Every Latina engineer whose ideas were credited to someone else. Every Asian American who was asked, "No, really, where are you from?" The room was still again. Airlines don't just move people. They reflect society. And if we want to fly further, we can't keep shrinking the cabin of belonging. He stepped forward. So today, I'm announcing something. The room leaned in. Ether Air is launching a new initiative, the Belong Project, a hiring and leadership acceleration program for first-generation Americans, refugees, and those who've been told over and over they don't look the part. More applause, but he wasn't finished. And we're starting with the very industry that made that mistake last week. He looked straight into the camera feed now being broadcast live across 3 continents. JFK's Terminal 6 will be redesigned, new contracts, new staff, new training. We'll fund it, but we'll also run it, not just with efficiency, but with dignity. Thunderous applause. Social media exploded. He's not just flying planes, he's flying past every boundary they built. Daniel Kwan just made every CEO in that room look like a passenger. That night, Daniel returned to his suite in San Diego, opened the balcony doors, and stood in the cool air. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt quiet. And maybe that's what victory really was. Not noise, but stillness. Not revenge, but change. His phone buzzed. A message from the same woman who had defended him in the JFK lounge, the one in the red suit. She had tracked down his assistant. Just to say this, I've been flying for 30 years. I've seen too many boardrooms filled with suits who look the same, sound the same, and think the same. Thank you for shaking the ceiling instead of just climbing it. Daniel smiled, then typed back, "Next time we're in the lounge together, the drink's on me." She replied with a laughing emoji, but then added, "Just don't make me cry in public again." That moment, when they said your name, I felt like we all won. Daniel stared at that message longer than he expected, not because it flattered him, but because it reminded him that representation isn't a headline. It's a hand reaching back so others can climb. Back in New York, Edward Sterling sat in a small legal office across from an HR mediator. His face was gaunt, his voice subdued. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said. "I was just following protocol." The mediator blinked. "And your protocol includes ignoring boarding passes." I didn't recognize the name. The woman across the table leaned forward. "Do you recognize it now?" Edward swallowed hard. "Yes." "Do you understand that your action cost the lounge a multi-million-dollar redesign contract, that you've made your employer the face of discrimination in a viral global conversation?" He nodded slowly. "And more importantly, do you understand that what you did, how you did, it hurt people?" His voice broke. "I do now, but it was too late, not just for his job, but for the illusion that his intentions were enough, because impact was what remained, and the impact was a scar." Weeks later, JFK Terminal 6 reopened, sleek, modern, staffed by a team that looked like everyone, signs in 12 languages, cultural awareness training on every floor, food from immigrant-owned businesses, and a lounge named the Horizon Room with a plaque near the door. This space belongs to everyone, especially those who've been told otherwise. Daniel never asked for that plaque. He never asked for a tribute. But the day he walked through those doors again, no one stopped him. No one asked for proof. No one blinked. And in a quiet corner, a young boy no older than 10 saw him, tugged at his mother's sleeve, and whispered, "Mom? Is that the man who owns the airplane?" Daniel turned, smiled, and knelt to the boy's height. "I don't just own it," he said. "I built it so you could fly higher." At the end of the video, a voice speaks directly to the audience. Where have you been told you don't belong? What doors were closed on you without a second glance? This isn't just Daniel's story. It's a mirror, a challenge, a spark. Don't wait to be invited. Build the room, then leave the door wide open.